Are we humans born with a completely blank mind? And are all of our tendencies and preferences a product of cultural norms and socialization? These are the questions which this chapter from the book Sex, Murder, and the Meaning of Life by Kendrick Douglas tries to answer. So we know that both women and men seek the same thing from an evolutionary point of view: to survive, in order to be able to reproduce and to later ensure the survival of the offspring, and by that making sure that their genes are passed on to the next generation. So here the question is, how do we make sure that our offspring gets the best genes, and how can we maximize its chance of survival? Well, this is where some differences between men and women come into place. Let us explain this through some research that has been done along the years, including Douglas ones. So at some point in time, researchers found that the differences between men and women were in the way they were attracted to each other. So it was observed that men tended to be attracted to younger women, while women tended to prefer older men as partners. And the thing is that at that time, the belief that humans are born with a completely blank mind was widely spread. And that is why this seemingly universal and different tendency of attraction of man and woman was attributed to the influence of socialization, cultural norms, and the broadcast through media. But Douglas greatly doubted that all of our human behavior could be explained by cultural norms alone. So he and his team came up with the hypothesis that men had an innate tendency to look for fertility cues in women, while women were born with the tendency to look for men's resources, which makes sense taking into account the evolutionary goals we subconsciously try to achieve, and which we have mentioned just a few moments ago, if you remember. When they conducted several experiments to test this hypothesis, they actually found proof for it. So what they found was that men, regardless of their age and culture, were interested in the women who displayed the highest degree of fertility, that is usually women around their 20s. And consistent with that, they also find that teenage boys were also attracted to 20-year-olds. Just like 20-year-old men were also interested in women around this age, and as you can imagine, 50 and 60-year-old men also displayed the highest interest in women who were in their most fertile years. And on the other hand, they also found that women were truly interested in older men because they tended to have the most resources, just such like a stable job or money. And that is something that can be a great advantage to ensure their offspring's survival. These mating tendencies were, by the way, also found across time, many years into the past, even before the technological era. So, considering his findings around why men seem to be more interested in much younger women, you might imagine that he did not believe that culture and modern media images were the determining cause for this phenomenon, but that it could actually be explained by a couple of universal biological differences between women and men. The first one would be that women undergo menopause and men don't. So at some point in their lives, women stop being fertile. And thinking from an evolutionary point of view, it makes sense for men to have an innate bias to look for fertility signs in women, because that's their only chance to pass on the genes to the next generation. And the second one would be that women seek men who can provide the most resources in order to be able to take better care of their children. And that makes sense too, because older men tend to be more resourceful than younger ones. So that would explain why women are looking for older men while men are looking for younger women. So the main point of Douglas' findings up until now shows that mating is not about age itself, but more about certain characteristics that are attached to certain age intervals, such as fertility and resources, which both are essential for evolutionary success.
The final proof for this universal tendency was actually found when Douglas studied a group of Aboriginal Australians called Tiwi. The curious thing about them was that they seemed to portray an exception to his previous findings, suggesting that men were more attracted to younger than older women. In this tribe, most young men were actually married to old and fertile white-eyed women, while the young fertile young women were married to older men. At first sight, this didn't seem to make any sense from an evolutionary reproductive perspective. Why would young men be more attracted to women who were not longer able to reproduce? As Douglas started to dig a little deeper, he found that young women were actually very attracted to young women too, just like men in most other cultures. So it wasn't a matter of lack of attraction, but a matter of social rules which were imposed by the old and powerful male members of the tribe. So in this tribe, it were the old and powerful men who got the chance to reproduce and pass on their genes to the next generation. This universally established tendency in humans of men being attracted to the most fertile women, regardless of what age these men have, proves that we humans are not born with a blank mind, but with certain innate biases and tendencies that modulate our behavior in the future. In order to illustrate this finding, Douglas came up with the metaphor of the mind being like a coloring book. It comes with some prescribed lines and figures, but it can and will be colored in different and individual colors as an individual goes through life.
In this chapter, Douglas was trying to convey an explanation about how our brains operate through a number of different mechanisms, or, as he calls them, subselves, of which each has a specific role to help us achieve our evolutionary goals: survival, reproduction, and survival of the offspring, depending on one's current developmental stage in life and the situations one finds herself in every day. To answer the question concerning whether the brain has only one or several mechanisms, or how many subselves direct our daily lives, it is necessary to take into account the characteristics of a situation and the people we are with. A theory by William James suggests that subselves are related to different categories of groups of people: relatives, friends, partners, enemies. But this proposal has a limitation, because the relationship between two people can change depending on the context in which they are interacting in, and depending on their history. Friends can turn into enemies, one can start dating with a friend. Due to this ambiguity, Douglas said that this issue is better answered by formulating the next question: which kind of problems do we typically have to solve, and which are the keys to accomplish it? Thus, looking at this through these questions, the functional subselves seem to be driven by fundamental motives and are specialized to master different kinds of situations throughout our lives. Research have come to the agreement that 7 subselves have evolved. Firstly, we have the team player, related to affiliation and with whom we decide to reciprocate, to share and manage our problems. Finally, the ones who will be there in case we need it, but this subself has also a limitation: people who get more than they give. These persons will suppose a disequilibrium, so we better make sure that we don't have any around, and also that we are not one of them, because we will be refused. The go-getter, related to status, determining a hierarchy, leaders and followers, who is above and below us. This self is about being respected by others in order to get more and survival reproductive benefits. The night watchman, related to self-protection. This subself will protect us from any danger we could face with, warning and preparing us for what will happen next. The compulsive, related to avoiding diseases. In order to maintain ourselves healthy, we may avoid contact with the ones who seem sick or even disgusting. The swinging single, related to acquiring mates considering sex-specific cues and our strategies to find the best partner ever. The goose puss, related to retaining mates, making them happy and scanning people in the market who will probably make our partner happier. And finally the parent, related to keen care and whether our children or grandchildren are doing right or not. Still, the subselves mentioned above are just one possible categorization, as there does not yet exist a full consensus about how many we actually have. However, these 7 seem to satisfy our most important motives related to survival and reproduction. It is also important to know that just one self is active at the same time. Although we can switch to one or another quickly, however, constantly having to switch could become exhausting in the long term.